So
What a treat.
I know. So the purpose of this conversation with Mary Abrams is to both honor this incredible studio that I've worked in for years, but also to honor her. I feel that people don't really know all that you've done, and what a wealth of knowledge and experience you have, and a resource if we want to resource you, mine you in our modernity way. You know, you've got a lot to offer, and you've done so much. And you know, I really want to honor them because it's been years. So let's begin with the beginning and give a little bit of history of how you came to all of this and where you are right now. So Mary Abrams has a beautiful studio called Moving Body Resources in New York City. And you've had it, we're going to kind of work backwards to the beginning. You've had it for how long now, this particular studio? And then in Soho, you had it as well.
There's this particular space that we're in now, almost 17 years.
Yeah, 17 years in New York City. She has held ground and center for so many healing modalities and creative adventures. Name some of the things that have happened in the studio over these 17 years that you like highlight. You've done a lot of workshops. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've taught with people that you really speak to some of them.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of workshops inspired by the Continuum work that I've been doing. And speaking of that, Emilie Conrad, the founder of Continuum, she taught here from 2006 until 2013. And before that, she was teaching in other spaces that I was sponsoring her in. Susan Harper, another very important associate and co-teacher with Emilie and teacher of mine, did workshops here for many years. And Gary David, who's another important person in the mix of Continuum, Emilie Conrad's former husband. He and I co-taught workshops here for many years.
And he was he's a psychologist, so he's right?
No,
he was a musician.
He's a musician, a jazz musician and epistemologist, but very interested in biology of emotion or the affective system, in the way in which that is inspiring, shaping, motivating behavior and meaning in our experience. Liz Koch has been teaching here ever since I moved to this space, and teaching in the space I had before this for 2 decades now. Let's see. Master's degree course happened here from 2009 till 2017 from the University of Central Lancashire in England. I was teaching and leading the course here in the US.
And let's take a moment and pause right there, because that's a big thing. It was a graduate program, right, in somatics. And the fact that you were teaching it and it coming from not a top-down model of, because I feel like somatics has that whole kind of patriarchal overlay right now, but you're, from the center of your core and your fluids and your being into how do we express that. And so there's a very large shift there, because it's a very creative process that you bring through the continuum lens, but also through your own experience. So let's stop there just for a moment and pause about that. So people came to do their Ph.D. Their MA program, right? It was an MA program, and it started in Europe. How did you get connected with them?
It's a really interesting story. It starts with, for whatever reason, I'm starting to have kind of this daydream about what would it be like to actually teach this kind of work in a university or college program situation. Not having any idea about how that would work, and not really wanting to go out and try to find a position.
Right.
And so that daydream had been going on for maybe about a year, and I was on the board of the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association.
Yes, that's also an important piece that you have done.
And as part of that board service, I became president of ISMETA. And in 2006, right after I moved into this space, I got a call or an email from a woman in England, Amanda Williamson. She was going to be in the US because she was training with someone here. And she wanted to come and talk to me about the undergraduate program she was teaching on at the University of Central Lancashire in relationship to ISMETA and training programs and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, I don't know why she really needs to talk to me, but okay. And so Amanda came and we had a lovely meeting, and she told me all about the BA program. And I said, well, you know, does it really match the criteria? But it's a fabulous BA program in terms of somatics. But, you know, if they wanted to be a training program, here's the, you know, things that we have to fill in. And then she just drops this seed. Well, you know, I'm really interested in developing a master's degree program. So my colleague Penny Collinson and I, you know, are sort of working toward this. And I was like, sounds great, be in touch. Then 3 months later, she contacts me again. She says, I've designed the program. It's going up for approval. We exchanged a little bit about the name of the program. I actually ended up contributing to that first tagline of how it got named to help make it more somatically sort of.
Oh, what's its name?
It was the MA in Dance and Somatic Well-being. And then the second line is connections to the living body.
Oh my goodness.
So
lightly said.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was a really wonderful, spontaneous collaboration with Amanda. And part of the uniqueness of her vision for this program is she really intended it to be a heart-centered academic somatic movement training program.
Yes.
And she had that clarity about the vision based on all the ways she had sort of researched the different kinds of training programs she saw out there and what really spoke to her. So then she invited me on the, so there's several rounds of validation that go on at the university to approve a new program, a new master's degree program in particular. And so they did their internal evaluation and it passed that. But then they had to do what was called an external evaluation. So they had to bring external experts outside the department in the university and outside, both outside the university and then outside of academia. So they brought in.
Oh, that's interesting. Outside of academia.
Yeah. So there was somebody, I think, from the nursing department who came, nursing school who came. There was a woman, Sarah Watley, who's a wonderful educator, somatic movement and dance educator in the UK. She came from Coventry University, and then I was the external expert in the field of the profession, because at that time I had not been teaching any academic courses. So I've always laughed about being called the external expert in the field. But, you know, because I was with ISMETA and I understood the criteria on a different professional level.
Yes. You were a good candidate, actually, for that position.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, happy to do it. So I got to go to England for a weekend. It was my very first time. It was beautiful. It was sunny. It was picturesque. These little sheep in the fields, you know. It was really fabulous. We approved the program, and then she asked me if I would start teaching in England. And so I taught the first couple of years. I taught the first 1 or 2 modules on the course. And then, within a couple of years of it beginning, because it started in the fall of 2007 in England at the university. Then Amanda came up with this idea that we should start a course here in the US.
Absolutely.
Because the University of Central Lancashire has a kind of long-standing reputation of international, satellite programs.
Yeah.
And so this was their first and only, as far as I know, program that happened in the US. And the next thing I know, it's just like clipping along, and we started a whole new section of the course here in the US in 2009. And then as Amanda's interests in the university teaching process began to shift and change, she resigned from her work at the university, and I ended up becoming the course leader here in the US, and Penny Collinson became the course leader in the UK. And so I did that basically from 2010 till 2017, and Penny same 2010 till 2021 when the course ended over there. For whatever reasons, the higher ups in the university, as they're envisioning and redesigning things, decided to withdraw the course, even though it had a waiting list of people waiting to get on it.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that must have been kind of disappointing. It also happened around COVID.
It was very, very sad. And yeah, the timing was kind of really peculiar, because I went to England to teach my module in March of 2020. And we were all hearing about COVID and hearing about certain places starting to shut down, and then I was there like 2 days early, and so then the admin had called a meeting, and they didn't know I was going to be there, so it just happened that I was able to attend the meeting, and that's when they announced to the whole dance staff department that they were going to withdraw the MA course. So that was a very sad moment. And then, so I knew I was teaching my last module in this course as it had existed from the time that I knew it had begun. And at the same time, this pandemic was, sort of creeping in and beginning to take over the world. And I finished teaching on March 15th, flew home on the 16th, and the U.S. border had shut down that night.
Wow.
Now, I would have gotten home as a U.S. citizen. I learned that. But it was like
still strange.
It's
like strange. A door closed.
Yeah, I came home to New York, and the shelves were empty of a lot of things, and basically the city had started shutting down and shut down within 2 days. So so it was
a strange ending also to this very large portion of your adult life. Doing an educational program. It was totally. And with no explanation of why. I mean, regardless, they didn't know COVID was happening at that time. So it actually had nothing to do with that. No. And so, do you instinctively? I'm just curious why you think that a program like that. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. I know it has to do with investors and all things. But when a course like that is popular and actually effective, and the somatic conversation is growing in the psychology world, you would think they would link it to not only the creative arts, but to the psychology of body and trauma, and like you said, affect and emotion and expression. Do you have any kind of your own way of kind of putting all that together, why someone would let that go when it's so actually a sprouting, a sprouting plant,
Well, Penny Collinson and Tim Lamford and Kirsten Wellhopper, who were the course staff of the MA course in England, they had already started doing kind of outreach programs and linking programs with people in the health studies department. I can't remember if they did some with the people who were in the psychology department or not, but and it was already in existence within the performing arts area of the university. So in a way, it was already,
it was already moving in that direction.
I don't think the higher up administration was really looking at anything like that. I think this is totally my opinion, it's really kind of just based on very low other information. So I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah, no, I understand. Sure.
My sense is that they just had a different vision for where the university needed to go in terms of
Resources.
Resources, but very obvious, very practical, very mainstream job application.
Gotcha.
So students can train as an engineer or a forensic scientist, or
right.
You
how you make a living from this.
Right.
From this degree.
Right. And so they were actually they had been doing a variety of things in many aspects of the performing and creative arts already prior to.
Was shrinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was shrinking, changing things around. Yeah, it was getting.
I want to speak just a tiny bit more of that, because I think with the knowledge you have of actually training people with an MA, like, that has to be a question also of, why am I getting this MA? What is the purpose of having an MA in this profession? And, for 20 years, I've gone to Denmark. And the what we would call somatic educators there are physically trained, but they're psychologically trained. They don't divide it. And so their whole psychomotorist, psychological realm is totally coherent. There is no separation. And being in that field, being in that environment where people simply do not compartmentalize, was rich, which is why I kept going back, because I was being in a field of people who were training me and paying me for it, which was really fun. So it's the best when your students teach you all kinds of things that you don't know. And it's really a rich education. And so to me, that's a kind of cutting edge, but it's a cutting edge that's tradition there. It just, that's why, they're known for their ergonomic furniture, right? And they have the profession. It's a profession. The government sends you to school to become a so-called somatic educator, in which you might work with handicapped, you might work with children, you might work with pregnant women, you might work in a factory. We're helping people with ergonomic issues. You like it's actually a profession.
Wow.
Yes, and it's integrated. So you would think that in that practicality, there would be some crossover of these ways of thinking that would penetrate other institutions, and yet it doesn't. There's this kind of, there is this still compartmentalized way of thinking about it. Yeah,
and it's really complex, because every governmental system can have an effect on how things are compartmentalized or more unified.
Well, and that's exactly why in Denmark you can get an MA, get paid for getting it, and become this therapist that actually can work with the sensory system and work with developmental issues, and can also work with creativity and how that affects learning. And you can, apply it to pretty much any vocation you might choose.
Yeah, and that particular statement, you can apply this work to any vocation you might choose, is kind of the key to how significant this work is. And ultimately, what a lot of students began to actually recognize more and more as they were on the course. Exactly why people took the course, I think, often was different for them coming in than when they graduated.
Absolutely.
It was definitely a personal transformational journey, and a transformational journey within a group experience. It was a transformational journey of a somatic, like silent level somatic experience on every level, and that included the rigor of a kind of academic process in which, as the primary leader of the course, and in the case of all the U.S. students, I was their primary tutor through the whole thing. one of my interests was to keep, challenge isn't quite the right word, but it became challenging to get students to recognize that this is not the same kind of education that you grew up with. There's a lot more creative possibility. There's a lot more room for messing it up. And each one of us in the process, in a way, met our own trauma from earlier education processes. It was sometimes hardest for the good students because they had so learned to compartmentalize themselves in order to get assignments done. And so some of the time I was teaching, I would just be encouraging them. I was like, go mess this up. Don't try to get the best grade, because that's where you start, like, this other creative material and a somatic experience starts to come out of your learning when you allow yourself to forget about the rules and not try to be the best students anymore. And, you know, interestingly, most of the time when they did that, they'd still get a really good grade anyway, but it would just start to come from a whole different realm.
That's right. It actually was a more expansive and deeper level than if they just do the assignment as you have given it.
Right. And I kept telling them, all you need to do is pass, because you'll get your master's degree. That's all you need.
But in reality, that's just a kind of task for saying, calm down, because actually what you're studying is just that whole nervous system that you're interacting with in yourself. And the patterns and the conditioning and the often making small. You know, how can I make myself smaller so I fit in this box? Versus how can I actually not work with a box? And what would it be to not be in a box at all and not even perceive myself outside of the box? But there is no box. You know, and then what would this mean? How would I create a container then? Then it shifts the conversation of what is really a container that allows something to birth itself. Which is a much more organic process than a linear structure. I mean, this is huge to me, because I feel that in my own work, people don't come to learn about the psoas. I mean, that's not why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm not, you know, it's people are, I'm interested in perception. So I'm interested in how we limit our perception through the structures that we've been conditioned by. And how, but one of the things Emilie used to say that I repeat over and over is the insistence on that homeostasis. No, this is the way it should be done. This is the way we need to move through this MA program, because this is the structure that the MA program created in the first place. And yet within that, even though there is a container there that's called the MA educational program, there's this fluid, which is the work that you do, is how do you access that fluid? Yes, we have a body that is, you know, a system, and yet we're moving through something that not only within us, but beyond us. And so to me, I'm very sad that the program ended. And that there isn't one here that, you know, provides that kind of education, because I don't think there is. And unfortunately, but so for you as a professional that took on this and wanted to take on it and had even the seed of it before it showed up in your lap and said, yeah, well, here, you want to do this? Here it is. What did you take away from that experience, or how did that feed you in your creative process?
Well, it definitely expanded and strengthened me as a teacher.
Tell me an example, what do you mean by that? Because you had to be responsive to students or you had to be responsible to them. Like, what does that mean to be a stronger teacher to you?
Well, I had to work with a particular articulation of a curriculum. I had to teach it I think most of the module teachings were 5 days long. so 5 full days. There's holding a group process in there, but
Yes.
there's also meeting with each person individually and how to sustain as best as possible the sort of regulatory needs of the group and the individuals and myself all at the same time, while still intentionally meeting certain kinds of criteria, much of which was exciting and fun and deep to explore, and some of which was just, we have to take a look at what the assignment is and, talk about the nuts and bolts of how to fulfill the assignment. There was also, I had to evaluate students.
Yes.
And that's a hard thing to do, because the most important evaluation is how I'm supporting students to be more articulate, generous, and present in their own self-evaluation.
That's right.
And yet, how do I evaluate them in the fullness of a somatic experience and not just go, sort of reduce it to, I've got to say this, and tell them they got this mark or that mark kind of thing. So that was an interesting process, one in which I actually enjoyed, in the sense that I really wanted to give them an evaluation that would fill them up, fill them in, fill them out,
like that.
Inspire them to keep doing what they're doing well, recognize how they can work with that more, and then also start to explore their edges where things are not so easy, things are challenging. And know that there's support for that too, so that it's not like here's your criticism, now go figure it out. And then there was also peer support in that evaluatory process, because students for many of the modules would come back and teach each other, and so you get peer feedback, and how we played with the feedback, how we structured that. So again, it was supportive, not just reductive. So all of that as a challenge. And then there was the creative challenge of coming up with material. Sometimes revisiting familiar material years after years, but every time it was a completely new experience. Other things would come out of it. I would pull from new resources. One of the modules that I taught most consistently in the UK was a module called Movement, Connection, and Support. So we're in the realm of somatic movement. We're exploring what do we mean by these concepts of connection and support, and what are the ways we experience that through movement and using experiential anatomy references. I drew upon some of your work in particular, where you wrote some things about the heart. And so the heart as a primary center of connectivity in our body. So there were different ways of working with material in that module, both like experientially in terms of anatomy, but also conceptually in terms of what concepts mean, what we've learned about them definitionally, but then also how do we experience them at a silent level through movement, breath, sound, gesture. So yeah, experiencing, continuing to develop creative material in that way over and over again over the course of 14 years with many of the modules, and then definitely 9 years while I was teaching here.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you have a desire at this point in your career to take some of that and continue with it in some way?
I would love to. And so for me, the course in the US ended at the end of 2017, and then I continued to teach my module every year through 2020. So now it's been almost 3 years since I taught on the course. And because of that, and because of COVID and a lot of things, and I think also my time in life, I've been in this what feels like a very long term, it's at least 5 years, kind of restructuring of myself. Even like, I know I'm still here to be teaching and creating and working, and yet going about that in ways that feel different than I did in the past, because I have different needs now, I have different motivation. Having had the great opportunity to have this long of an experience of a career and feel that I've been successful in the ways that I have.
You have. You've been very successful.
And yet I don't want to keep doing the same thing in the same way. And also being 60, I'm looking at my life now and my life ahead in terms of, well, what are the ways I want to keep embodying this experience in ways that feel like they still support me to keep discovering and learning instead of just repeating. So yeah, so I've been so I am interested, and I'm starting to feel myself. It feels like some things are kind of starting to land and like grow in a more like solid, manifest way in terms of beginning to like offer something in the interest of all the kinds of teaching I did on the MA course.
Yeah, I feel akin to that idea of I'm disappointed in the programs, to be quite frank, that I see in the somatic world. I feel that there isn't, I want to say, the seriousness of the reality of what we're really working with. And I do like the fact of the way Emilie structured her, as we know, she never really wanted to teach, right? And that wasn't her, forte. But the fact that you really actually can't get through a program just any old way and get a certificate, and now you're this teacher or that teacher. To me, it's so irrelevant in the reality of what you're really fostering through that program that you fostered, in which, and she was instrumental in me. I said, I don't need to have a program about the SOAS, like I don't own the SOAS, So, I came up with an application program. In other words, you could be in any field, you could be interested in anything, but how do you show up in that field?
Right.
And that became the application course. It wasn't that I was going to teach a particular group of people how to, because that doesn't matter. If it's not alive in you, you can say anything you want about it, and it's meaningless, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that would be the only kind of teaching I would love to actually do is in that regard of really, how do I keep helping individuals who are in whatever program, profession, whatever their longing is to show up, is how does that actually, I don't even like the word embody, and it's part of the title of, Stalking Monceau's Embodying Your Core Intelligence. But that was, 2018. But I've heard that word now so much, I'm so sick of it, because you can't not be embodied and be in the fucking earth. Let's just get real, right? So then how do we actually show up in this time and space is kind of like, and what I'm hearing you say is that's what you brought your students through, is how do I actually show up? And yes, there is intellectual knowledge. There's a lot of intellectual knowledge, but the knowledge itself is meaningless unless it's actually lived experience, right? And so I love the fact that that's what you cultivated, and you've done it in a fairly quiet way, which, you are a really interesting woman that way. You don't have, you're not out there, singing your song. So people don't actually know that you developed a lot of people, they think you run a studio, and you teach some classes here, and I think I'm getting hostile as I get older around women who are really doing incredible work, who are not actually at the forefront of people recognizing who's innovating, who's doing the, kind of like behind the scenes a little bit. So, so let's go on with that, because that was a huge part of your life. And meanwhile, you were also doing continuum classes here.
I was teaching classes. I was seeing my private clients. I was still doing some workshops, and I'm still owner of this place. So at the time, I had an employee to run the rentals and everything, and people who have to pay to clean and all of that. So yeah, but I was still I had, I don't know, 3 or 5 jobs. You could say job titles, whatever. But yeah, I was definitely.
Yeah, and you have 3 clinician rooms here, and you have 2 studios, and that in itself, just that, running a business like that. You ran a business for. So how long have you had a studio in various parts of New York? When did you start that?
This is officially my 3rd studio. The first one I had was on 17th Street between 5th and Broadway, and I shared that space, the whole floor or part of that floor, with a Pilates training program called McCain School for Integration. So they happened in one part of the space, and I had a significant sized room in the back. We shared the office spaces, all of that. So that was 1999 till like August of 2001. Then in the end of September 2001, I moved to the other side of that same building on 18th Street, and it was my first space that I had all to my moving body resources. It was about half the entire size of what we have here, and that's where you first came to start teaching on 18th between 5th and Broadway. So we were in that space for 4.5 years, early 2006, and we moved here in February of 2006.
That in itself is quite an accomplishment, to keep a thriving studio going in New York City. I mean, the competition must be incredible.
It's a particular kind of experience. It's a particular kind of competition.
What made you want to do it?
I never wanted to. That's part of like
somebody twisted your.
No, it's kind of the cosmic joke of it all. It's like when I was sharing the space with the Kane School, Kelly Kane, who's the founder of that school, she'd say something about renting space, and then I was like, oh yeah, you don't want to rent space because then you have all these people to manage and blah, blah, blah. And yet then a couple of people came, some Tai Chi people came to me, a Reiki person came to me and wanted to know if they could rent my space. And I was like, oh, okay. And then when I did move to the other space, because it was just time for the Kane School and I to separate, because they needed to take over that whole space. And I also needed a space that was aesthetically all about everything I was doing.
Yes.
And so I had to rent space because being the quieter type of person that I am, I don't have enough of my own like students and things coming through all the time, and to pay the rent on the space in New York City.
Well, you're not performative that way. You're not doing a show,
Yeah.
And New York is glitzy show.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to show yourself a lot. You got to have a billboard with your face on it. It's that kind of thing. And
yeah.
So you were looking for a very different kind of environment too. Yeah. And you were very clear, actually, about what kind of environment you want to create for people.
Yeah. And so it was necessity, and I had also managed for a few years a rental program for what was then called the IM School of Healing Arts. It was only 2 blocks from where we are on 25th Street. And Levent Bulakbasi, who is the founder, head of that school, he had been sponsoring Emilie for years. And so when he opened the space on 25th Street, I was in a major life transition, and I was just starting to teach continuum classes. And so I started teaching in his space, and long story short, started managing his space rental, because he had I don't know how many thousand square feet. He had one room that was 2,500 square feet.
Wow.
So anyway, genetically speaking, I have administrative skills. Both my parents were basically, white-collar desk workers, my mom at a bank, my dad for the railroad. So I definitely got a certain amount of that genetically, but it's also, it's kind of like administrative work is like doing the dishes. It's very task-oriented. It's done when it's done. You can put it off for a while, but you still got to do it. And there's something about it for me. It's like once the dishes are done, once the bed is made, I settle. So there's always been this way in which the administrative work feels a little grounding to me, as in the process of really also needing to be extremely creative, expansive, in that unknown territory of so many things.
Such a beautiful combination, though. I mean, it's so expressive of life, right? It's kind of the Zen of life, where you go to the Zen master and he's out sweeping the front deck, the front steps.
Yeah.
It's just, that is what life is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been very lucky as well. I why, how exactly?
And the people who show up who say, here, I would like to rent from you.
Yeah. And
as you call, there's a calling. I don't know if you know that, but energetically, I think you draw people to you that are phenomenal. Everybody I always meet in these studios have been, I mean, every time I come, there's a consistency, which is rare. Usually you come into a space, the next time you come in, it's not what the space you were in the last time you were in, right? So you don't really know, you never don't know. But there's always this sense of that calm here. When you enter the space, things are going to be where they are, or if not, they've been reorganized in a better way. And there's just this sense of place. So I call that landing and locating. That if you can't land and locate, you can't actually have a flourishing, right? You have to have some roots that allow the plant to really, show up in its fullness and in all that it can be. Yeah. And that's what you create.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it's definitely been important for me, a lot of sense of landing and locating. And it's probably anybody who's witnessed me in classes, not so much me teaching, but me when I'm participating, I'm often the person who's halfway under the floor because I'm still landing and locating.
So let's bring in the issue of when did you start and when did you become a continuum teacher? And how did you arrive into that world?
Well,
and who were you before that? But we one step at a time. Let's start with, so you brought up Emilie, and you brought up the fact that you actually ended up, being her sponsor here.
Yeah.
And you studied with her.
Yeah.
How did you enter that, and why?
Well, I was introduced to Continuum through a ballet teacher of mine here in the city. Her name is Cynthia Babbitt, and she was also in the process of becoming a Rolfer through the Guild of Structural Integration. But she had somehow done workshops with Emilie, I think through some friends and colleagues of hers. And so anyway, I was going to her to get body work while she was still in training. And she kept saying this continuum, cellular movement, I really think you should do it, da, da, da. And I really had no idea what she was talking about.
So who were you at that moment? You had been doing dance?
Yeah, I was focusing on being what we call a downtown modern dance choreographer, contemporary dance choreographer, performing in places most people have never heard of, never will hear of, except if you were in that more sort of downtown avant-garde and contemporary dance and performing arts scene.
Okay, well, we're going to get to that next. But so there you are in this avant-garde modern dance, and you're working with Babbitt because she's going to practice on your integration. And she knows Emilie. Yeah,
and so I was like, okay, I had a lot of respect for Cynthia because of her particular way of embodying ballet and teaching ballet. It felt very safe for me in my body. I don't have a really ballet body. I'm not a super high tone kind of dancer, which many ballet people are as fluid as they can also be. Anyway, so I had a lot of respect for her. So I just, my intuition said, okay, take this workshop. And so I took my first workshop with Emilie Conrad here in New York. It was in a hotel ballroom. Emilie would joke at the end of the day, we've got to get out of here. There's a bar mitzvah coming in. And it was fascinating and like really strange all at the same time. And this was my perspective at the time. So this is clearly how limited it was for me. I was used to being a dancer. We'd go to these studios, we'd be doing our thing, we'd move, but we didn't sit around and like really emotionally process. That might happen with a few friends on the side or this or that, but you pretty much were just focused on the work and then you go home. So here I am, and we do a little bit of breath and movement. And it looked to me like it was a sea of suburban housewives.
Which Emilie was not.
No, with a few, a spattering of male bodies, and everybody was like in this like emotional process that they were talking about, and I was like, wow, I have no idea what this is all about. But meanwhile, you've got Emilie Conrad, and this was the thing that I was like, I know I'm right here. Emilie demonstrates the primordial breath. And so she takes a little bit of time to describe it, and then she, closes her eyes. And in one breath, I saw everything about her transform.
That was beautiful.
And coming into this experience, really just passionate about creativity, and my real interest in whatever we call dance performance was that sense of how I could transform in the moment of performing. That I felt like that's it. That's exactly what I know on some deep level in myself, but I didn't have access to as immediately as she did. And and I was only able to take 3 days of that workshop, and I actually ended up with the flu as part of my last day. Now, of course, we would never go to a workshop if you felt flu-like symptoms before. But I think it wasn't so much that I had the flu, probably as much
I have a feeling it just moved you on a deep, deep level.
Yeah, all the breathing, all the wave motion, it was just
cathartic.
Yeah. And yet at the same time, again, I felt like, this is home for me. This is bringing me home to my body in ways that, as a young dancer, by then I was 32, but for the last, say, at least 12 years of my life, I was just so focused on what do I have to do to train, what do I have to do to get my work out there, what do I have to do to be with other people working. It was all very much, and I was just getting further and further and further away from the joy of dancing and moving, and how dance is, as a child, is what helped me actually have a sense of body. It was the context in which my expressivity, my intensity was welcome.
Yes, that's a big piece. And I can't tell you how many people come work with me who come from that impulse as a child of just the joy of dancing, and then go into dance and then say, and I lost it all. It just shut it all down. And coming back to fluid movement, awakens that child again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and awakens that creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And helped to awaken my body into the body I was living at that time, not a body from some other time or a body I was trying to create. And that was really important because at the time I got it, I started exploring Continuum. I was also feeling emotionally completely depleted. And part of that was because of the way I was driving myself physically in ways that weren't healthy for my particular body. And then all the other sort of social cultural constructs, pressures, things that I was trying to fulfill based on some image of what I thought I was supposed to do or become. And all of that in the mix with my own recognition needs, which I was very confused about. Yeah. So Continuum started bringing me home, like it brought me home, and then it kept bringing me home, and it just kept resourcing me more and more and more, and still does in all the different ways. I continue to learn with that as a sort of portal of entry into this experience of bodying.
Yeah. So how did you become her sponsor? At what point after that did you start bringing her work into your studio, which is an interesting also, people go off to study with people, but
so
because you've created a container for Emilie for many years here, because she moved to Santa Monica, right?
Well, she was
already there, right? Yes, actually. So then you actually provided a very incredible space, because those workshops were potent and they were days long, and and there was such a sense of community. So you actually brought community, the Continuum community here, and had this so that's a very different way of being than going off to be with a teacher, coming back and doing your own work. You actually held space for the person who was bringing you home.
Well, so that was 1994, the first workshop. The next opportunity I had, for all kinds of reasons, was the following summer of 1995, and I took a workshop with Emilie in Virginia, and I saw that there was a teacher training program being developed. So I talked to her, and she gave me that, way, Emilie, look at you. And she said, okay, here's the next thing you have to do. I was like, okay, I'm in. Anyway, and so that began a process that by the end of 1999, the first teachers were in line to be authorized, and I guess it officially happened. We signed our authorization papers, and then in 2000 we were officially authorized. So I was in that first group of people. I think we were around 25 people at the time. And about that same time, Emilie, I had already started doing some teaching of Continuum, first in a studio that I occupied with the man I lived with at the time, and then at the IM school, renting space from them. And Emilie was still coming to New York to teach, and Levent Boulukbasi was sponsoring her, but that started to become complicated in various ways. And so and actually the last year, I think that Levent sponsored her, I just said, let me take over the administration of this for you. And part of it was because, the workshops always happened, but you could sign up for a workshop, and this was in the days you call and leave a message, say, I want to sign up for the workshop. You wouldn't hear back from them until maybe 3 days before the workshop. Oh yeah, you can bring your money, and so
we do have to put it in context.
So I was like, I think I could call them back right away after they register, and maybe even get more of their money in advance, whatever. So I just took it over.
I love that you have that managerial, aspect. Get it done. And get the dishes done.
And communications all over my, what do you call it, astrological chart. So it's I just have to have something communicating. Anyway, so yeah, I took that over, and then it was clear that Levent just needed to kind of let it go altogether. And then I said to Emily, I'll sponsor you. I'll find a space. I'll do it. And so the year 2000 was the first time I fully independently sponsored Emily. And I had for 5 years, I rented a space called Morocco Studio. And I think that might have been the first time you did a workshop with her here. I don't remember. For some reason, I see you in that room with us.
Yeah, in spirit, if not physical.
Yeah.
My first one was Mount Madonna. It was a 5-day, and it was an advanced course, and I don't know why they let me in. I'd never, yeah, it was the reenactment of Christ.
Right.
And I definitely was the cross. I had no snake, no arrows through my body. Dead Liz. But it was fabulous to be there. It was really eye-opening.
Yeah.
Well, so to kind of, I know you've got other things you have to do too, but I really want people to understand the depth of what you offer here and what you offer as in your being. And so I want to kind of, you've kind of tracked back to like what made you maybe be, are you actually from New York? Right?
No, I grew up in Mason City, Iowa.
Okay, so let's track it back to that young girl who loved movement and found something there that gave her an opportunity to be bigger than maybe her life would allow.
Yeah.
How did she make the leap to New York?
It was gradual and intuitive. First, I had to get to college. I'm the first person in my immediate family to go to a 4-year school.
Where'd you?
And I ended up at St. Olaf College.
Which is where?
Southern Minnesota. It's just south of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And it's a good Lutheran Norwegian school. And I knew it was a good school. And how I ended up there was I was sitting in my physics class in high school next to my friend Susan Hahn. And her brother was going to Carleton College, which is in the same town. She had a St. Olaf catalog on her desk. I literally picked it up. I said, can I look at this? And she said, sure. I picked it up. I'm starting to leaf through it. I see they have a dance program. I'm like, oh, St. Olaf's a good school. They have a dance program. I'm going to apply there.
Good. That's a good way to do it.
And I got interested in going to college for dance because I had a friend who's a year older than me who went to the University of Iowa to dance. And that was a very big dance program, very geared toward like musical theater dancing and other kinds of things. I didn't want to go to a big school like that. So anyway, I applied to 3 schools. St. Olaf had the sort of most coherent dance program, and they accepted me, and I said yes. And I had never even been there. But that was my stepping stone. And so actually, I could say a lot about the dance program and how important it was for me at that time, but probably some of the key things were my 2 teachers, Susan Bauer and Tony Sostek. And that my first month at St. Olaf, there was an avant-garde whole dance thing happening in Minneapolis, and we went up to see these performances. I didn't even know what modern dance was when I went to St. Olaf. I had never seen it, heard of it, but I thought I can do that. It was a very strange world, but I kept thinking, I knew that something was right.
Well, something was right for you. I love that. I love when we're tracking stuff like that.
And so also during that month, they'd contact improv teachers who'd come to St. Olaf. We did some classes with them. And then bits and pieces throughout my education, their different somatic practices were introduced. Laban Bartiniev, body-mind centering. And then I moved to Minneapolis after that because I wasn't going to go back to Iowa. And it was the only place I could think of. And there was a lot of really interesting dance. In fact, some of my favorite dance performing experiences were at that time with choreographers. I worked with Georgia Stevens and Lori Van Weren, and I also was doing my own work. And so I was exploring different somatic experiences. Also, Elaine Summers released work with balls and things taught by some people in Minneapolis and body mind centering, particularly with Diane Elliott. But nothing really called me. But all of that was in the mix of me when then in the spring of 1987, I literally woke up one morning and was like, I've got to get out of the Midwest. I've got to go live in the most culturally diverse, dense environment I can find. I can only speak English. And I've been to New York once. I had come here in college once. It was my first airplane trip coming to New York for a school program. And I thought, well, I'll go to New York and see what happens. So I saved money for 8 months and then moved here.
By yourself?
By myself.
Wow.
I didn't have any real friends, but I had a place to stay for a month at least.
Okay.
And now I've been here almost.
And how old are you at that moment?
I was just 25.
Wow.
Yeah.
Brave soul.
Yeah, brave.
Naive, all those things. Yeah. But that's what it takes.
Yeah. I mean, I had nothing to lose.
I had nothing to lose.
It's like, what's the worst that can happen? I have to go. I go
you
back.
You have to go home.
I go back. I hopefully figure it out. But I've been here 37 years almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing. And I feel like I've lived a number of lifetimes here, all of which have been really important and informative.
So how did you, when you got here, how did you tap into that dance community that you ended up being part of?
You know, that's one of the amazing things about New York City. All you have to do is show up and start saying hello. Go to a class, go to a performance, we were talking about this the other day. People like to talk to people here. People like to get engaged. They like, it takes a while always to develop long-lasting friendships, but I met more people in 1 year here than I met in 3 years in New York and in Minneapolis. And it's just the difference of style, environment, and density. But it was so easy to get involved in the dance world here.
That's great.
In so many different ways. And I still have some very, very good friends from those early years.
And it sounds like you did some choreography.
I did.
And did you do some performing during that time?
I did. So that first 10 years I lived here, I did a fair amount of choreography, performance. I also did some arts administration at Dance Space Project at St. Mark's Church.
To keep you balanced. Or keep the keep the rent paid.
That was to pay the rent.
Yeah.
I actually moved on from that and went into temp work in corporations, doing administrative work, just because it paid better, and it took me out of the identity of being an arts administrator. So because I wanted to be more identified with being an artist, and that
and you didn't want that on you. So to kind of finish, I wanna bring you full circle to this idea of innovation and choreography, or that idea that you're a creative soul, that we all are. Although there is the whole Bali piece that we haven't talked about yet. So let's do Bali first, and then we'll do that as our final. So you started going to Bali. And you started bringing people to Bali, and the studio has, there's essence of Bali here. Talk about how you ended up in Bali, because that's a part of your spiritual journey.
Well, Susan Harper, my teacher through Continuum, she had been taking groups to Bali with a man named Ken Ballard. I don't know how many years, but in 1999, I saw she was taking a group in the year 2000 over my birthday. And that was all I needed. I was like, oh, I have to be in Bali next year on my birthday. I never ever thought about going to Bali. The only thing I knew about Bali was like South Pacific. Musical. Anyway, so I, saved up my money because it was a really big thing for me to do at that time, and went to Bali. And it was one of the ways I describe it is, as soon as I landed on the island of Bali, I forgot to forget who I was.
Oh, wow. That's a big statement.
Yeah.
I forgot to forget. Right. I'm going to cry. Okay. It's Very touching.
Yeah. And I had a very deep experience, and I cried for a month when I came home, in the way that it felt like I had separated from the love of my life.
Yeah. And feel it. Ooh.
Yeah.
That was the transmission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So how often do you return to your lover?
Well, it took me 5 years to return that time. And I went again with Susan and Ken. And then at that time, I was also in a new relationship in 2005. It was new as of 3 years, but and then Eric and I went back to Bali several times on our own, also spending time with a dear friend of mine whose name is Dharma, who works with Ken Ballard. And during those years, continued to develop my relationship with Ken. And Susan, I don't remember exactly when, but probably 10-ish years ago, maybe, she just recognized that her time of taking groups to Bali had come to an end. Yeah. And so I spoke with her about, and then I started getting this voice, like, I think it's time for you to take a group to Bali. I was like, oh, all right. But I knew I didn't want to do it without Ken, because Ken has lived in Bali. I mean, really lived in Bali. He has cultivated really deep relationships with really beautiful and gifted Balinese people. And it's a completely different journey. And going with Ken and being with the priests and priestesses, his Bali family, and they really embrace you as their family because you're Ken's family. And so it's just a very deep, rich, healing experience on every level. And so I took my first group in 2015, and then another one in 2018. We were supposed to be there in 2020, thanks to COVID, but the next group's happening on May 27th to June 9th, 2023. And I still have spaces for people to join. And I really, really, if you have any little voice in you calling you to go to Bali, I'd say yes, and call me. Love to help facilitate that experience.
And what a way to go too. Yeah, very different than as a tourist.
Very different. Yeah.
And you're still going with Ken.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the two of you.
Definitely.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I want to go. I'm moving, but I want to go. I was like, so let's go back to the creative piece to wind it up, because I feel like one of the things I adore about Continuum, but also the fact that you've integrated all these aspects of somatic work, is not with the idea of fixing something, but initiating the potential of the human organism. And that is my love. And so my work has always been, yes, I learned a lot about the SOAS, but and usually it's because all these therapists and doctors and all these people come and study with me and they educate me. But I've never educated myself in that way. I'm not a physical therapist. So as what I called a conceptual artist, when I was in Boston at the Museum School of Fine Arts, which I wasn't an art major, they just brought me in to create chaos. There's something about the innovation piece, and I think the spontaneousness of the what happens before something is choreographed, like the impulses. And then I'm curious, how do you take those, because that's what Continuum is, right? Something emerges and you're tracking it and you're allowing it to show up and you're being moved and touched by it. How do you see that translate into something that actually becomes this form, like a choreographed piece, now versus when you were that 25-year-old or 28 or 29-year-old who who's creating this choreographed pieces. If you were back there, what would you say to her about what would be the potential of allowing something to emerge that maybe wasn't as structured, or maybe that structure is just as important? Would you, what advice would you give yourself as a young woman if you were choreographing? Because you are choreographing, you're choreographing your life.
Yeah.
That is what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're the inner choreographer.
Yeah.
Choreographer.
Yeah.
What have you taken from all these years of all that you've sensed and experienced?
Well, I would definitely encourage her to slow down and just feel her breathing. And to get really interested in what's moving her. And to know that that is always enough and so much more.
Thank you, Mary. It's been a delight.
Thank you, Liz.